Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia.
Carrie, summer hosting is, on the one hand, kind of easy because there's so much abundant produce and you don't have to do much to make it taste good, or you can just throw things on the grill. But on the other hand, it's hot and it makes it a little more challenging to be in the kitchen and you kind of have to strategize.
Yeah, I think a lot of people dream about summer and all the things you're going to do during the summer, how you're going to gather with your friends and your family and connect and do all these things. At least for me, I imagine other people feel this way too, is then when I start to think about inviting people, there's that nervousness and that anxiety that comes with, okay, so now there's 12 people coming to my house. What am I actually going to make? To your point, there's so many great foods in the summer, but how am I going to get all this work done before people walk in the door?
Yeah, I thought that was where you were going, which is sort of like you have all these aspirations for summer and you kind of never get through the list because everything actually moves so fast in summer and there's so much going on. So I think we're both thinking of menus that we really can execute in the summer that feel like they celebrate the season. And there's some strategies here with things that we could make ahead, things that we can make with our friends standing around in the kitchen, things you could eat outside or in a park. So when I was thinking about some summer hosting, one of the things I personally like to do is go back to some menus from the past. And actually, there's this menu from now, 20 years ago, where a girlfriend and I in LA, we went to the farmer's market. This is when I was just getting into farmer's market as like a regular routine. And it was peak summer produce. There were squash blossoms and green tomatoes and fruits and all the wonderful things. And we just got everything that we thought was delicious. We came home to our house, we cooked, and we had this feast, just the two of us. And it was such a memorable memory. My friend is Emmeline, I should say. And we still are friends to this day. So I'm like, I need to recreate this meal this summer because it actually was so perfect. So the menu is fried green tomatoes, stuffed zucchini blossoms, a corn salad with tomatoes, avocado, and lime dressing, and then an apricot cake for dessert. I'll get into each of them. First, starting with fried green tomatoes, which is actually something I haven't made in years. Do you ever make it?
I never make fried green tomatoes. If they're on a menu, I order them. I just have to stop you for 1 second and just say, I think what I really love about what you're talking about with this menu is going back to a memory that already has warmth and connection and friendship in it. And the repeating of good ideas is a good idea. It's good to repeat things that you know, that you already like, that you've already made. I imagine you're going to talk about how you fry green tomatoes, which I've never done, but going back to do a recipe that you haven't done for 5, 10, 15 years is also a reminder of how capable you are, right?
I guess so, yeah. And you always get a little bit better, but I think what you're saying is so true that we're always looking for new and better and best. And sometimes actually, especially on a hot day, especially in a busy season, relying on what is comfortable to you, especially when you're hosting, is more important than ever. And if you loved it, probably someone else will love it. Like Emmeline doesn't live in Portland and I'm not making this for her again, but I know I can make this for someone else. And even though we won't have the same experience, I know it's a joyful menu. And the fried green tomatoes, again, I haven't made it in a long time and there's so many different ways, but I think one of the things that makes a fried green tomato especially good is a cornmeal crust. You want that texture around it because the tomato is so soft. And certainly you could use green tomatoes from your garden. Sometimes your garden's overflowing with tomatoes, but a lot of times farmers market have green tomatoes in the summer because people like this dish. This recipe has you do basically what you do with schnitzel or with, a Milanese or any kind of cutlet or any kind of battered thing, which is you want a flour mixture that's heavily spiced and seasoned. That's your first layer on your tomatoes. Then you put it into an egg mixture, just beaten eggs, salt and pepper. And then you put it finally into your coating, like your outer coating, which in this recipe, she uses a combination of cornmeal and panko, which I think is really interesting. And she says panko is not traditional. Breadcrumbs are not traditional in this way, but that it adds a sort of lightness and extra crispiness to the tomato. So I have not done that. I've always done like a typical kind of cornmeal after the flour crust, but I'm definitely curious to try this with panko. And then you fry it in shallow fried in a cast iron skillet. And the other thing about fried foods in the summer is you can kind of serve them room temp. So you can make all your fried things. You could reheat them in an oven if you wanted to right before a guest arrives, or just cook them fresh, have people milling about. And while your fryer is already out, that's where I'm thinking about the fried squash blossoms. And this really was part of our menu. We just stood around the kitchen frying different things. And squash blossoms are so special. They're zucchini blossoms. You might have them on your own plants at home. So you take out the center that's not edible, and then you still have this flower. You kind of want to be delicate. And typically what people do is some kind of ricotta and hard cheese and basil mixture. So like Parmesan ricotta and basil, maybe a little egg to bind it. I'm going to include a really traditional recipe in the links. So you just stuff your little blossoms. I even just use a spoon. You don't need to put it into a bag and pipe it. You can just be really delicate. And then you also make a little bit of a batter, like a tempura batter, and you dip your blossoms in, and then you shallow fry them in the same pan maybe that you did your fried green tomatoes in. And then with all the fried food, you want a salad, you want something light, bright. This you could have made hours before. I love a corn salad in the summer. I just love fresh corn right off the cob, not cooked, combined with fresh, juicy tomatoes, ripe tomatoes, not green ones. And avocado is so good. It adds a little bit of creaminess and richness. And then all of that in a lime dressing is just kind of my go-to combination of flavors. But then for dessert, I want something really special. So you have these crispy things, these fried things, they're all vegetarian. It's all a celebration of produce. And also in the summer, it's apricot season. And do you love apricots?
I do love apricots. I love that
Yeah.
they're a stone fruit that has this softness, but I love the tanginess. There's a sour that I think is so great for a sweet dessert.
I completely agree. And to me, they also have a very floral note. Apricots have such a distinctive flavor. There's almost nothing like it. So I always overbuy. And then I'm like, what do I do with my extra apricots? And I love making simple cakes with them, or sometimes I make muffins. There's this recipe for an apricot kuchen with labneh whipped cream. It's from Food and Wine. It's by Adina Sussman. And it's really similar to many, many apricot and peach cakes I've made in the past, where you're sort of having your fruit. It's almost like a sunken fruit cake, but there were a
Right.
few details here that made it feel really special and something that I would think of like a summer hosting worthy. For one, in the dry mixture of flour, she also adds semolina, which is cornmeal. And
Yes.
so I love this echo of the fried
Yes,
green
you're going
tomato.
back. Yes, yeah.
You add a bit of that texture to this cake. It's also going to make it more moist because that cornmeal has that effect on a cake. And then it's all the typical things, butter, egg, sugar. And then you take your apricots. She tells you use small ones or no bigger than medium, and you halve or you quarter them. So you're leaving them in big pieces. They're going to be really visible and beautiful in your cake. And you place the apricot pieces on top. They sink as they bake. While they're baking, you can make this whipped cream. We've talked many times about labneh whipped cream. Any kind of yogurt, sour cream, labneh, which is strained yogurt, added to heavy cream in a whipped topping. It first of all helps stabilize that cream so you can make it more in advance and it won't
Right.
separate and it won't get weird in texture. And it also adds tanginess, which complements the brightness of the apricot.
Sonia, there's so many things that I love about this menu. A couple of the points that you made about making the corn salad ahead of time, right? And having it also just cold in your fridge. And also, you can make this apricot kuchen earlier in the day. You can whip your cream because you're adding the labneh to it earlier in the day. I just did a version of this of whipping cream ahead of time. I didn't add labneh. It held up okay, but it wasn't as airy as I wanted it to be by the time I
You
got.
really
Yeah, and I think about this menu that I think is so smart is one, I just love it such a celebration of veggies and of summer produce, and it's all vegetarian. And that you have this really great way of opening up with something that feels so special. Fried green tomatoes, stuffed zucchini blossoms. My take on this would be that you just invite only people who are willing to gather around your frying pan and kind of eat them hot, almost to the point of like, is it too hot to even eat? That kind of is the only way to eat a stuffed zucchini blossom. And they are so special. And so just like having your friends stand around and then maybe sit down, have a drink, have your corn salad, talk for a while, and then have this incredible dessert. I wish I could be at your table for this dinner.
Yeah, this is definitely the kind of meal where you put everything out at once. You're not even doing courses. To me, it's almost like a middle of the day meal. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about hosting menus in the past few months, and we've talked about potlucks and picnics and even Best Bites where you and I have hosted. And I think a lot of those menus have been for larger groups, but sometimes in the summer, you just want to have a couple close people over. You don't need to make a big deal, but you still want to host. You still want to celebrate the season. This is that kind of menu.
Yeah, I think I still think about menu planning the way I did when I was a personal chef of like the appetizer course, the dinner course, you sort of set out dessert after later on. And I think that's such a great way to kind of you could compress it all.
I don't think there's any right way to host. I think it's whatever calls to you. So, Carrie, what's your first menu?
Well, Sonia, I'm sort of pulling at some of the same ideas as you are. I have a sort of midsummer dinner party, and I like what you just said about putting everything out. I think maybe I would do a version of that with this menu too. So, my menu is open faced tomato sandwiches with a creamy cucumber spread, grilled salmon with a citrus salsa verde, a frizzled onion cabbage salad, and a peach ricotta cake. So, there's a lot of overlap here, I think. A tomato sandwich is so special in the summer, and I think most people just make them and eat them over the sink. They're so juicy and delicious. Maybe you sit down and eat them. I like to eat them over the sink, honestly.
I think you're right that everybody who loves a tomato loves a tomato sandwich in the summer, and everyone has really specific preferences too, don't you find?
I agree. And I also think I'm happy to receive someone else's vision of a tomato
Me
salad,
too.
of a tomato sandwich, which is why I was thinking about this. I would be so happy to come to someone's house and see these open faced sandwiches, which honestly are so simple. You take some softened cream cheese, you mix in maybe a little bit of lemon, some cucumbers, some herbs. It's very
That
simple. You
sounds
could
so good.
this is where you want to use your most beautiful tomatoes. And one of the things that I always like to do, I think we just talked about this in an episode too, is slice them and then salt them and put them in a colander for maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes to release some of that excess moisture so that when you actually assemble the sandwiches, they can sit for a little while. The recipe calls for like Texas toast. I think you could use really any kind of great bread that you've got from the farmer's market. I would probably use my sourdough. I would toast the bread so it had a little bit of dryness going into that. And then I would make that an hour ahead of time and let it sit out. So it was kind of at room temperature. I think the tomatoes taste better that way.
That's an interesting point, especially if it's toasted really well. It could sit out for a while. It's seeping into the bread, almost like bruschetta. But I guess you have a spread that is like a barrier as well. So you're not getting too juicy of a tomato topping.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you want to make them in the morning, but if you want to make them and then go change your clothes and put on some lipstick and get the drinks ready. And then I just think in the summer, I love fish. You certainly don't have to do salmon with this idea. Get some mint, get some scallions, some capers, some orange zest, some lemon zest, and parsley, and throw together a fruity salsa that I think is fresh and herby on any piece of grilled fish. The recipe that I'm linking to is the Giada de Laurentiis recipe. One of the things that I actually disagree with the recipe is that she encourages you to add agave nectar to your fish before you grill it. And I think whether you're doing it on a proper grill, like a charcoal grill or a gas grill, or even in a grill pan, I would not add something sweet to my fish because I think it will just tear it apart. So my
You
trick
know,
to
will stick more and burn, and then the fish will lose its shape as opposed to if you brush something on after it's grilled.
Yes. And so I think a little bit of olive oil. I really like the mayonnaise trick. If you add a little layer of mayonnaise to your any fish that you're grilling, it and you put it on a hot grill, it will release better than a cooler grill, and it will release better even than olive oil, and it doesn't taste like mayonnaise. So I think it's interesting to maybe add a little brush of honey or agave nectar at the end, which will coincide with this salsa verde, which is bright and green and beautiful. To go with your fish, to go with your grilled fish, there's a frizzled onion cabbage salad, which I think is not well named. I think it's way more interesting than the name implies. Really, what it is this Napa cabbage salad with a little bit of heat from serrano chili, a lot of brightness from cilantro and mint, and then this really delicious peanut butter, lime juice, fish sauce, sugar, garlic dressing. You're not reinventing the wheel here, but the thing that really drew me to this recipe is that you fry a couple of onions in oil And this is something that reminds me of you because we did this at our retreat together. And this was the first time I had ever done it. And so just get out some vegetable oil in a shallow pan. You thinly slice a couple of onions. I would probably use red onions here. They don't call for flouring them. I would probably flour them, just like a tiny little coating of flour, which makes them a little bit crispier. And this is something I would do earlier in the day. I would fry the onions, I would make the salad, I would make the dressing. I would have all of that ready to go so that when I was getting ready to serve the fish and the salsa verde, you could just bring out the salad and toss it all together, which would keep the crispiness of those onions.
Sounds so good. I love, as you know, crispy onions on almost any salad or dish. It adds so much sweetness. It adds that extra bit of crispy texture on top, but it's really also, it's just that one extra touch that makes it something you do for hosting as opposed to just a regular night.
Exactly. And then for dessert, I'm going to serve a peach ricotta cake, or I usually am drawn to nectarines. And so I think you can easily sub in nectarines if you wish. And I think the way that you just described the peach kuchen is very similar to what this peach ricotta cake looks like. You make it in a 9-inch cake pan. You slice your peaches or your nectarines, and you can see the fruit on top of the cake. And it's just like a golden, buttery cake that I think is easy in the summer. You can make it ahead of time. And I would be serving this with vanilla ice cream for sure.
Yeah, it sounds really similar. I think we're thinking about the same things. Mine with apricots, yours with peaches, and I think you're right that nectarines are a perfect swap for peaches, and they have a little more flavor, I find, than peaches very often, especially in LA. I feel like I always gravitated towards the nectarines there too.
And there's a tanginess about them. What drew me to this particular recipe too was the ricotta, because I think ricotta
Yes.
makes your cake a little bit more tender.
Yeah, it's the same kind of effect that the semolina is having in the other cake. Again, these are very similar ideas, but they're different takes and they're going to be different in both flavor and texture ultimately. And I love having the option of both. Well, Carrie, when you were talking about the cabbage salad and the peanutty dressing, it's a perfect segue to my next menu, which is a very Southeast Asian menu. And part of it is that in the summer, I crave Southeast Asian food more than I do even the rest of the year. I think it makes sense. The climate in much of Southeast Asia is quite hot and summery. And so I think the cuisine of those various countries and places really lend themselves to summer cooking. And that's when I'm craving it. I'm craving Vietnamese food and Thai food. And actually, Portland has a really amazing Thai food scene in particular. So I've learned a lot more about the cuisine while living here. And I want to start this menu with a really fruity salad. It's a cross between Vietnamese and Thai. It's from Andrea Nguyen. It's a Thai melon salad. I love a sweet and savory fruity salad in the summer. It's refreshing, it's hydrating. So this one you make kind of similar to your dressing, although there's no nuts involved. You make a really traditional Vietnamese vinaigrette with fish sauce. And in this case, she has a lot of grated lime as well. And so you have your very savory, umami fish sauce vinaigrette, all this lime zest. And then the salad itself is with watermelon, cantaloupe, roasted peanuts that you chop, a little bit of sugar to sweeten it. She has you add either salt or MSG, and then a generous amount of torn herbs. She suggests mint, cilantro, or any kind of basil. You could use regular basil or Thai basil. And then that flavor of something salty with something so melony and sweet with herbs, with crushed peanuts is kind of how I like to make many different salads in the summer. So I just love this whole recipe.
One of the farmers I worked for when I first moved to LA was a melon farmer. We're always buying melons in the summer and eating them, just slicing them and eating them out of the fridge and eating them for breakfast. But I love this idea of a melon salad that has all these savory elements. I think that we're all kind of craving a version of that in the summer.
I think so too. And you could also spice it up and add some fresh chilies if you liked. And then for the main courses, I'm thinking about two different dishes. One is from a restaurant in Portland that no longer exists that was called Pak Pak. Actually, there were multiple locations of this Thai restaurant. It was really well known. They eventually opened a restaurant in New York. York, and they were known for their wings. In fact, I took you to Pok Pok's wing location when
Oh
you came to
yes,
visit.
yes, we had those wings. I mean, this is not surprising that you're adding wings to your list because you
I love
are such
wings.
a wing lover. Yes.
Well, I was thinking for this menu, what are things you could throw on a grill really easily? And certainly you can make this without a grill. You can pop wings in your oven. But this was really like, what could you be making outside on a beautiful summer evening? Really, what's crucial to these wings is having a little bit of a marinade with brown sugar, again, fish sauce, garlic, cilantro, and you're kind of dredging all those wings in that sauce, and then you're throwing it on the grill. You're not having to marinate this for hours, but it's getting them all sticky. And to your point, it will probably burn a little. And that is part of what's going on with this little bit of sugar added to the marinade. If you let them sit, they will eventually release themselves. They won't fall apart. Wings are very sturdy. And even if you have little bits of burnt pieces, that adds to the flavor.
Yeah, I think that it totally adds to the flavor. And wings, they're going to hold together differently than a piece of fish. And so I think adding that sweetness to a chicken wing, it's going to have that nice char and have that sweetness.
Yeah, and then, you add a little bit more sauce fresh that's separate from the raw chicken at the end. You can add a flurry of cilantro. They used to also add crushed coriander. It's not in this recipe, but I also might add that on top. And then for the side, I'm thinking about a dish that I discovered actually when I was recipe developing way back when, kind of when you and I first met. I was tasked with developing a recipe for a Thai style glazed corn, and it's a technique that's common in Thailand. I found a recipe from Kei Chun that I really like. And the main highlight of this technique is that you're essentially brushing coconut milk onto corn as it grills and like over and over. So it develops a glaze and a sweetness. And there's different ways, like some people don't keep brushing it. Some people only do it at the beginning. Some people do it at the end. But in this recipe, it's not just coconut milk. She combines it with a little bit of coconut milk, soy sauce, brown sugar, fish sauce again, lime juice again. I think when you have menus that rely on the same set of pantry ingredients, but each thing is going to taste different. This is not going to be a menu where everything tastes like fish sauce because each of the underneath ingredients is going to have its own distinctive flavor. But I do love that you don't have to get 45 different things. You're just relying on a handful of staples that you can then use in almost every dish on your menu. And then you're grilling your corn every so often. You brush the sauce onto this. At the end, you can garnish this with more fresh cilantro, fresh mint. She also recommends finely grated cotija cheese, which is a Mexican nod. I wouldn't put on the cheese, but I love that idea. And then lime wedges so people can squeeze them on right before they're eating them.
Sonia, I've never heard of brushing grilled corn with coconut milk. That sounds so delicious. I mean, we've talked about different recipes where you combine sweet corn with coconut milk, but I've just never thought of it this way. And I also wonder if you could simmer your corn in a little bit of coconut milk before you throw it on the grill.
I wonder how much it would absorb, but I was just say cooking corn in coconut milk is another thing that I've been really into and talked about recently on our farmers market episode because it's like a really fun take on cream corn. It's actually lighter. It is sweet, but it's not too sweet. It has a coconut flavor that pairs so perfectly with fresh summer corn.
I really have to try this. I feel like my family would love it.
I think they would too. I think Mac would really, I think it's a very kid friendly. Then for dessert, there's this Filipino cake that's called Mango Royale, which is essentially a no-bake icebox mango pie. I love a no-bake icebox cake in the summer. They're just so easy and they're so cold and refreshing again.
Yes, yes.
So in this one, it's pretty easy as can be. It's a graham cracker crust with graham crackers and butter. You don't have to bake it. You cube up some mango. You kind of squish them with your hands. I think you could use a potato masher. That's the direction. So you kind of release some of their sugars and soften them, but you don't have to get out any crazy equipment. And then you taste it because some mango is sweeter and you add some condensed milk. And then if it's not bright enough, you add a little lime juice. So if you want a little more acidity, sometimes a mango can be so sweet that it needs that little brightness of lime. And then you combine condensed milk and whipping cream and you whip them together until just they're firm. And then you do a layer of the whipped cream and condensed milk, which has a slightly thicker mousse-like texture than just whipped cream on its own. Then you do a layer of this gently broken up mango mixture with lime. Then you do another layer of the cream, another layer of the mango. Once you assemble it, you stick it in your freezer, and it's recommended to do it overnight, which I love for hosting as well. You could do this day before, you could probably do it 2 days before. And then before serving, just an hour before, you want to take it out of the freezer so it has time to soften, but it's still going to be very, very cold.
When you serve this, does it have more of like a soft serve texture? Because it's not frozen hard.
No churn ice cream is typically made with just heavy cream and condensed milk. It's just that it softens enough that you're not eating like a firm brick of frozen
Exactly.
cream. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it has all that fruit, so that's going to loosen the texture too, but it holds its shape when you slice it.
This makes me crave mango. This feels like a perfect dessert because, to your point, I mean, you could make it the day before. You could probably make it a couple days before if you just
I
wrap
think
it
so.
really well. And there is no cooking. You don't have to turn on your stove. I feel like this is something my son would really like, Mac would love, because he loves mangoes. And I also find in the summer that at the grocery store, you can really find mangoes on sale a lot too. I try to buy a few extras. You can throw them in your freezer, cut them up and throw them in your freezer.
That's a really good point. And not only do I think a kid would love it, I think it's something you can make with a kid because, you're smushing mangoes, you're
Yes.
whipping cream, there's no baking. I just think it could be a really fun activity.
Yeah, well, Sonia, we're both having a similar idea because that's part of my next menu. The appetizer is a raw vegetable pizza, which I'm excited to tell you about. It's from my childhood. Grilled okra with a spicy sauce, grilled chicken with root beer barbecue sauce, a smashed potato salad. And then for dessert, I'm thinking about ice cream cookie sandwiches or brownie ice cream sandwiches, both of which I was thinking about making with Mac because you can make those ahead of time, even up to a week ahead of time. I would be thrilled to have something like this in my freezer. If he comes home from camp someday, he can have a special treat. But I think at the end of a really big meal, it's also nice to just bring out a fun dessert like this that you've made ahead of time. Who doesn't love an ice cream cookie sandwich or a brownie ice cream sandwich?
I think you're right. Also, anything that is simple enough for a kid to make is something you want in the summertime. But Carrie, I need to hear more about this raw vegetable pizza.
So, this is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I hadn't found a recipe until just today by a recipe developer who's called Store Bought is Fine. His name is Trent Pfeiffer, and he grew up with this too. A lot of Midwesterners will recognize this dish. You take crescent roll dough and you make a pizza. So, you can make it in whatever size that you want. Usually, my mom would make it in a jelly roll pan or a sheet pan, and you take it to the park, you take your crescent rolls, you put them together to make a pizza crust, basically. You bake
Like
that in.
if you roll it out and you don't separate it, isn't it rectangular? Is that right?
It is, but the way that they cut them is they make it so it's easy to separate them. And so what I often do is kind of with my fingers pinch them back together so that they're more of a pizza crust. It's more uniform. And so you bake that until it's golden. You let it cool. It needs to be completely cool before you start adding things on top of it. And really what then you're adding on top of it is some kind of mixture of cream cheese, mayonnaise, sour cream, whatever version of a creamy summer dip that you like. This is the place where my mom would use a lot of dried dill. That's where I learned how to love dill.
Is it kind of like a thicker ranch dressing?
Yes, it's very ranch dressing. So this recipe uses a mixture of cream cheese and mayonnaise, and it also calls for like Hidden Valley Ranch, which my mom didn't use that. And then as far as toppings go, the sky is the limit. You're basically putting raw chopped vegetables on top of this creamy dip, on top of this buttery crescent roll dough. We would always use carrots and celery and maybe a little bit of cauliflower. You could also add scallions. He calls for chopped tomatoes, which I wouldn't do because I don't love a raw chopped tomato in this.
Yeah, I have never in my life heard of this dish, and it's like many other ideas. It's like a flatbread with a spread with a vegetable is actually something I'll do a lot in the summer. But this exact combination, no. But I love that it's your family's tradition. I love that you grew up on this.
Yeah, and this would always be on the table at a baby shower, a bridal shower, some kind of church gathering where people would want something that's kind of light. It's a really great vegetarian appetizer. One of the best parts of it, too, is that you can make it ahead of time. Sonia, I recently shared with you how much I love okra. So there's this recipe from Stephen Reichlin, who is a grill master. I think you've worked with him, right?
I worked on one season
Yes.
of his show as a food stylist assistant. He had like a main assistant, and actually, he and I went to the same college. And I love Steve
He's a
Reichlin.
Reedy, too?
He's a readie, and
Wow.
Steve Reichlin has an encyclopedic knowledge. He's maybe the foremost grill expert in the nation. I mean, one of them. Any recipe he shares is not just well tested, but typically well researched.
What I love about this recipe in particular is that it takes okra and makes it kind of fun for the grill. When you're at the farmer's market or at your grocery store, or maybe even in your garden, you want to pick okra that are about the same size. And then you use two skewers to make this little raft shape, which you could do the day before, you could do earlier in the day. It's very easy to do. And then you make this really delicious Cajun remoulade, which is basically like a spicy mayonnaise that you serve alongside of it. I would throw the okra rafts onto the grill and pull those off as my chicken was grilling, because then you could kind of give people like a little appetizer while you're grilling your chicken. And when I was a personal chef, I used to use a root beer barbecue sauce, which people would laugh when I would say, "Oh, it's a root beer barbecue sauce." And they would say, like, what? But really, adding a little bit of root beer into your barbecue sauce adds a nice gingeriness. It's really just a fun thing to add to a menu. And I feel like it's a very Midwestern idea.
Root beer has all those like warming spices. I can't remember. There's probably like 30 different things in root beer. And then the root itself, it's originally from an actual sarsaparilla root, right?
Yes,
That's
yes.
the original flavor of root beer. I have never ever made a barbecue sauce with root beer. It is not something I've tried, but I would happily try it. I feel like I've tried other things like this, like Coca-Cola infused sauces with meat.
Have you ever done a ginger beer barbecue sauce?
I've never done a soda in a barbecue sauce. I have made my own barbecue sauces, but they're usually pretty traditional when I make them.
Well, it's like sweet and tangy. You keep brushing it on, and then you serve some extra on the side so that people can also dip their grilled chicken in more root beer barbecue sauce. And then as a side, Sonia, have you heard of this viral smashed potato salad? I feel like you must have heard.
Heard of it. Yes, I've seen it all over the place, but I haven't made it yet.
Well, I again am always late to the game. So I just saw this recently. I think it sounds really genius. I really looked around for a recipe that had some pickles in it. You're taking baby potatoes and you're boiling it and you're smashing it and then you're sticking it in the oven and making it very, very crispy. And this is something I would do earlier in the day. I would get all my potatoes crispy and sitting out on the counter. And then you make this really delicious creamy dressing, sour cream, mayonnaise, a little bit of buttermilk, and then a ton of scallions, parsley, pickles. You could add some pickle juice to this. And right before serving is when I would combine it all together so that it maintained a version of the crispy potatoes with all the creaminess and all the freshness of the herbs and cucumbers and pickles, all those different
Wait,
textures.
there's cucumbers in the dressing or you're adding fresh cucumbers to your potatoes?
You're adding fresh cucumbers into your salad as well.
Wow, that's so unusual for potato salad. You have everything you were saying just felt like a version of what I already do with potato salad, just with smashed potatoes. But the
Yes.
cucumbers are different.
There's cucumbers, there's red onion.
I think it sounds really good.
And then for dessert, as I said, we're going to serve some ice cream cookie sandwiches or some brownie ice cream sandwiches. I'll link recipes to both. But I also wanted to share a recipe for sweet and salty grapes, which I think if you're having a beer or a Aperol spritz and you don't really want like a big heavy dessert, I've seen many recipes for frozen grapes that you add some kind of flavoring to, but this one really caught my eye. What you do is you take red or green grapes. The picture shows both of them, which I think is really pretty. You add some lemon zest and some sugar and a little bit of Aleppo chili or another kind of mild chili flake to it, and you freeze it all together. So you get like the frozen, refreshing grape with a little bit of saltiness and a little bit of spiciness.
Frozen coated grapes, I feel like, are having a real moment. And it also reminds me of almost like a tahine on fruit. That Aleppo pepper, that little bit of spiciness goes with so well with the sweetness.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And it's the same idea.
Well, that sounds delicious. What I love about it is these are dishes that are actually kind of new to me. The Midwestern raw vegetable pizza, the root beer barbecue sauce chicken, the smashed potato salad I also have never made, even though I've seen it. I love being introduced to all these ideas.
Well, and I think I'm definitely going to add the no-bake mango cake to my list because I think Mac would really love that.
I think he might too. Well, until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating!